All right, for those of you who don't know, my name is Lily Foley. I am a junior at Eastern Michigan University, and I have been involved with the BeLoved revolution for quite some time now. I went to Pine Hills when I was in middle school, and that was kind of around the start of when BeLoved and BeLoved revolution kind of became a thing. So I've been here since pretty much the very beginning. And a little while back, Debbie invited me to come speak about a topic that I felt very convicted on in my own personal life. The process of getting to this day and talking has been about a year. So the first time that we talked about it was a long time ago. And a lot of things have happened since then, but probably about a month ago, Debbie brought it up to me again, and I felt in my heart that it was ready, that I was ready, and it was the right time to give this talk. So before I start, I want you guys, actually, you know what? Natalia already did this. I was going to say raise your hand if you know what the 4 last things are, but now you all know, so that's perfect. So the 4 last things are talked about throughout the Bible, especially in the book of Revelation. And just a quick refresher, even though we just said it, it's death, judgment, heaven, and hell. So let's just start with death. Everyone in here is going to die, right? We're all going to die. And that is not to sound morbid. That's not to sound scary. I don't want you to be afraid of that, but that's really just the truth. And when you think about that, sometimes that can be a really uncomfortable fact to face, but we are all going to die. And I'm sure you have heard many times people ask questions such as, what would you do if today was your last day? What would you do if you died tomorrow? And those kind of questions sometimes come off as a little bit silly when we are young. A lot of us are in high school, college, or not too far beyond that, and there's kind of a sense of invincibility, I think, that a lot of us have. That's really hard to overcome, even if it's not a conscious thought. I think it's difficult to face the question of what would happen if I die tomorrow with giving yourself a real answer. So moving on from death, after that comes judgment, of course. So after death, we will face judgment before God, and that sounds really heavy, right? That's something that we probably don't think about on a daily basis, just like we don't think about our own death, but it's so important, right? If you know that the fact is that we are all going to die one day, right? Then there's got to be something after that. What comes next, right? So that's judgment. And judgment can really only result in 2 things: heaven or hell. Now, purgatory is not mentioned in the 4 last things because that's a temporary state that's not going to be the final destination of your soul, but either heaven or hell is, right? So I just want to read you a quick little excerpt from St. Faustina Kowalska's vision of heaven. She wrote in her diary, "Today I was in heaven, in spirit, and I saw its inconceivable beauties and the happiness that awaits us after death. I saw how all creatures give ceaseless praise and glory to God. I saw how great is happiness in God, which spreads to all creatures, making them happy, and then all the glory and praise which springs from this happiness returns to its source." And that sounds pretty good to me, right? Inconceivable beauty. That's what heaven is. Inconceivable beauty, glory, praise, happiness. And all of that returning back to its source, which is the Creator. Now, to contrast with that, I have an excerpt from St. John Bosco's vision of hell. So he writes, "As soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt an indescribable terror and dared not take another step. Ahead of me, I could see something like an immense cave which gradually disappeared into recesses sunk far into the bowels of the mountains. They were all ablaze, but theirs was not an earthly fire. The flames were with leaping tongues of flames. The entire cave, walls, ceiling, floor, iron, stones, wood, and coal, everything was a glowing white at temperatures of thousands of degrees. Yet the fire did not incinerate, it did not consume. I simply can't find the words to describe the cavern's horror." So he says, indescribable terror, to be contrasted with the inconceivable beauty of heaven. Just think about that. Of all things that are opposites, heaven and hell is really just the epitome of that. So inconceivable beauty, indescribable terror, those are the 2 parallels that we are either going to find ourselves in one or the other after our death and after our judgment. And again, this is not to scare anyone. This is just the truth, right? If we believe what's written in the Bible and we believe what God is trying to tell us, then we ultimately have to come to the conclusion that one day we are going to face both of these as an option. So I have one more quick excerpt also from St. Faustina Kowalska. She, in addition to her vision of heaven, she also had a vision of hell. And in this vision of hell, she witnessed 7 different kinds of torture. The first one was loss of God. Loss of God. Imagine a place, I want you to close your eyes. Everyone close your eyes. Imagine a place where there is no God, right? Complete loss of God. I want you to keep your eyes closed as I go through these 7 different types of torture that St. Faustina witnessed, right? So number 2, perpetual remorse of conscience. Perpetual remorse of conscience. Number 3, knowing that one's condition will never change. 4, fire that will penetrate the soul without destroying it. 5, continual darkness. 6, the constant company of Satan. And 7, horrible despair, hatred of God, vile words, curses, and blasphemies. All right, you can open your eyes again, that's all of them. But just thinking about that and contemplating that vision that she had, I keep saying it's not to scare you, but that really does strike a little bit of fear into my heart as I read that. And it's healthy, obviously, as humans to respond to something like that in that way, but we also have to put that into context and think, well, what is our next step? If we know these are the 2 places that our soul is going to end up for eternity, what are we going to do about it? So I just want to give you the definition of the word eternal real quick. So eternal means infinite or unending time. And I want you to think about that for a minute. Infinite or unending time. Now that's pretty hard to comprehend. Infinity, right? Infinity is a long time, way longer than anything that we have ever experienced on this earth or can ever experience on this earth. It's pretty impossible to wrap our heads around that, but that's what eternity is. In our life is just a fraction of a second in comparison to eternity, right? Like Earth is very temporary. Earth is a temporary adventure, and eternity is just so much more than that, right? This life, even, the age expectancy in America is probably 80 years old, 85, I'm not sure. Some of us may live longer than that, but that is just a snap in all of eternity, right? So keeping that in mind, it's really, really important to overcome the complacency that we find ourselves in living this life. So it's so easy to slip into habits where it's really, really hard to remind ourselves of eternity every day. So that's why we want to live with an eternal perspective. And there's practical ways that we can do that, right? One thing that I know people that do, they like to leave sticky notes with little reminders around their mirrors, so when they wake up in the morning and they're brushing their teeth or they're doing their hair, they see the same things every morning. Reminders that, number 1, we are mortal, right? Human life is fragile. It's not meant to last forever. Number 2, we are made for so much more than this life on earth, right? We are not made to live here forever. We are made to live in heaven with God. All right? So writing those reminders to yourself, some people find that really helpful. I don't know if any of you have heard of Memento Mori. That's like a movement started in the early church, but it's a Latin phrase that basically translates to remember I shall die, or remember one day I'll die. So I personally, some people might find this a little weird, but I have a skull in my room. It's not a real skull, but it's a constant reminder that human life is not meant to be forever, and someday my body is going to decompose, and I will end up just like that skull, just like a skeleton. But that is such a beautiful reminder to me that there's so much more beyond this life than we even know, right? All right, and then besides that, one of the biggest ways that we fall into complacency and just going with the flow, going with habits on earth, is just repeating to ourselves the lie that it's not that bad, right? All the time we find ourselves comparing ourselves to each other, and sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad, but it's so easy to see someone next to us doing something that's wrong or sinning and just think, you know what, I am not as bad as that person, so I'm doing all right, right? Like, I'm doing okay because I'm nowhere near as bad as that girl. I'm nowhere near as bad as that guy. But that is such a lie, and the devil uses that as a way to really just keep us in place and not follow the path of God, right? If you're not actively choosing to live your life in a way that God desires, you're choosing the path away from heaven, right? And that only leads to one place. So, another practical application of living your life avoiding complacency is going to confession. God gave us a beautiful, beautiful gift of confession. And personally for me, confession is really hard. That is not something that I like to do, and I'm still working on that so hard. Like, it takes a lot of effort from myself internally to force myself to go to confession. But you have to do it, right? Like, that is one of the most simple, beautiful things that you can do, a tangible way that you can help to overcome your sin, your pattern of sin, and lead your life in a way that is directed towards heaven. My last practical application, but another thing you can do is hold your friends accountable, and I know this advice is given in practically every single talk, regardless of the topic, but it's so, so important. So I want everyone to look around really quick. Everyone look to your right, look to your left. Look at all these amazing women in this room, okay? All of these women are striving for heaven, just like you. And if we don't talk about it with each other, it's going to be so much harder to live our lives in the way that God wants us to. So share your faith with the people around you, with the people at your work, with your people at your school, because you never know who else is thinking the same things or who needs that little, talk to them in the hallways, whatever it is. So holding your friends accountable and preaching your faith to strangers, like, that is the biggest thing, okay? God wants us to spread this to everyone. And this is so important, okay? And true friends are going to strive for heaven with you, right? Some people are scared to share their faith with others because they're afraid of what they might think. Myself included, it happens to all of us for sure. But true friends, the ones that you want by your side, they are going to be right there with you, striving for heaven, okay? So that's one thing to really, really remember. All right, so getting towards the end of this, but I just want everyone to really pay attention right now. If you've been asleep, it's time to wake up. All right? So listen, I have a couple things just to sum this up. Number one, death is inevitable for all of us, right? I'm going to say that one more time. Death is inevitable for all of us. It's going to happen one day, whether that's tomorrow, whether that's in 80 years, it's going to come at some point. So preparing for that and preparing your heart and your soul for that is so vital. Number two, we will be judged before the seat of God, right? We will be judged. And that's another thing you need to prepare your hearts for, because if you accept the fact that you are going to be judged by God, what are you going to do about it, right? We need to be prepared for when that moment comes, because like it says in many Bible verses, like the saints say, you know not the day or the hour that God is coming to this earth, or that time that you will die, right? So we need to keep that in our minds always. Number three, we need to remind ourselves constantly of eternity in our own mortality. I'll say that one more time too. We need to remind ourselves constantly of eternity and our own mortality. We're not going to live on this life forever, but we will live eternally in one place or the other. And lastly, we have some reflection questions that I think there's a slide for. So I'll just read those. I want everyone to close your eyes for this one too. You can open them back up, they'll be on the screen. But I just want you to close your eyes so you can kind of think about these just as I'm saying them. So the first one is, what material things are you attached to that keep you from making Jesus and the promise of heaven your treasure? What material things are you attached to that keep you from making Jesus and the promise of heaven your treasure? Number two, why is it important to remember one day you will die? Why is it important to remember that one day you will die? Number three, in this next week, what are two practical ways you can remind yourself that one day you stand before the judgment seat of God? What are, in this next week, two practical ways you can remind yourself that one day you stand before the judgment seat of God? All right, we'll have time later to Oh, sorry, I keep choking. All right, we'll have time later to really contemplate all of those questions, and they'll be up on the board, but I just want to leave you with one last thing. And that's just a reminder that you are not alone on this journey to heaven, right? Talking about death and judgment and hell and heaven can be a really heavy topic, but none of you guys are alone. And like I said before, looking around, and look at, even just in this room today, look at all these amazing people that want the same things that you want, right? We're all striving for the same thing. So sharing that journey is so important. And besides the people that are with you right here, God is always walking with you, right? God is always walking with you. And my favorite Bible verse is Psalm 23, verse 4. It's though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That's always, I'm not someone that memorizes Bible verses. I wish I was, but that is the one that I will never forget, because the first time I read that, it was just so striking, that visual of walking through the valley of the shadow of death, right? If you envision that, that's not a fun place to be. That does not sound very appealing. But I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So just keep in mind that regardless of what you're going through, regardless of what's happening on this earth, it is all so fleeting and so temporary, and we just need to keep in mind the eternal perspective to live for the rest of our life. Thank you.